Welcome, everyone, to day 3 of our Rainbows Over the Rockies, celebrating diversity with leadership and learning. We are so excited. We have over 380 people registered for our event, and our first 2 days have been packed with great information and great dialogue back and forth between the attendees and the presenters. I'll talk about a little bit about that in just a moment. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Paul LaChapelle. I'm with Montana State University. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I want to start with a big thank you to our sponsors and partners throughout this event. You can see on the list there on the screen that we have over 30 sponsors and partners. I want to recognize two, the Western Rural Development Center and our MSU College of Letters and Science that provided the majority of the financial sponsorship. So we're grateful for those two organizations and of course all of the others that provided financial contributions as well as in-kind support. Would also like to recognize a few colleagues. First of all, Deb Albin, who has just been a tremendous resource coordinating this entire event for really many months, contacting our presenters and putting this all together. So big shout out to Deb Albin. And also our social media coordinator, Nat Forcier. Thank you, Nat, for all the great work that you've been doing. Just want to go over the chat box and the Q&A. The Q&A is meant more as an anonymous rather, way to communicate with our presenters or with me, the host. So feel free to use that Q&A. Our chat box, you can send a message to all attendees. You will be identified if you do that. So just want to give you a little bit of a notice about that. But you can also send a private message again to me or to the presenter in the chat box. So feel free to use that for questions or comments. And myself and Deb will be monitoring that as well as the presenter today. So if you have any tech support questions, you can go to our Rainbows Over the Rockies website. I'll post that in the chat box in just a moment so you all have access to that. Feel free to check out the agenda, our presenter bios, as well as any tech support questions you have. We do have another tab there if you have questions that might come up throughout the day. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our first presenter of the day. Maru Gonzalez is an assistant professor and youth development specialist at North Carolina State University. And Maru, I'm gonna ask you to bring up your presentation now. Great, we can see that. So Maru, without further ado, go ahead and take it away. I'm gonna unmute you, go ahead.
Hey, wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Deborah, and all the folks who have put so much effort and love and energy into organizing this event. I'm really excited to be a part of it. So as Paul said, my name is Maru Gonzalez. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm an assistant professor and youth development at North Carolina State University. And I've worked with young capacities, including as a school counselor and as a teacher and as an intergroup facilitator. And through that work, I started doing a lot of work with LGBTQ plus youth in particular, especially when I was working as a conservative county in Georgia. And I realized just how impactful it was to be supportive and to foster an inclusive and supportive and affirming environment for LGBTQ plus youth. And that's really what drives me to do this work and to focus on this, because I've seen first the enormous impact that supportive and a strengths-based environment can have on LGBTQ plus youth in particular. And I'm really enthusiastic to be here, and I'm heartened by all the folks who signed up to be here, especially on Saturday, and especially in the middle of a global pandemic. I think it really speaks to your commitment to. So thank you all for being here today. All right. So I've already introduced myself. So next up, I'm going to why this work is important. And then I'll do a little bit of an overview of LGBTQ plus youth and go over some basic terminology. Then we'll get into best practices. And if time allows, we'll do a couple of case scenarios and open it up for questions at the end. We're going to go over some terminology briefly later on in the session. Before we jump in, I just wanted to everybody was on the same page when it comes to the acronym LGBTQ plus youth. So the terms lesbian, gay, and bisexual refer to sexual or affectional orientation, while transgender relates to gender identity and expression. So lesbian, gay, and bisexual and transgender are not the same thing. One refers to sexual or affectional orientation, and the other, transgender, relates to gender identity or expression. It's also important to note that transgender is not as intersex. Those terms used interchangeably. Transgender or trans describes an individual with a gender different from the one assigned to them at and or whose gender expression falls outside female gender binary. And we'll go over you know, what it means to be trans in more depth later in the presentation. Queer is a term that's been reappropriated by those whose identities challenge gender and sex norms. Queer is often used as an umbrella term, and it's one that's really been embraced by the gender. But use of the term queer, one has to be careful with, because older generations are still used to the queer being used as a pejorative. And so, again, just use caution and when using the term queer. Often, you know, for me, it's a matter of, you know, letting other people take the lead. You know, if someone prefers the term queer, then I'll use the term queer. Otherwise, I proceed with a bit of caution. You know, one of the reasons young people like that term is because you can't put queer in a box as you can with so many other identities, and so that's why that term in particular is so widely embraced. And then the Q in LGBTQ plus sometimes stands for questioning, which refers to an individual who's in the process of exploring their sexual orientation or gender identity. The plus in LGBTQ plus is used to include all sexual orientations and genders that would fall under the LGBTQ umbrella. Because terminology around sexuality and gender is constantly evolving, the plus is a way to be intentional about ensuring that nobody gets excluded. So why is learning about inclusivity and belonging for and with LGBTQ plus youth important? And if you want to go ahead and use the picture and just maybe type a sentence or two about why learning about fostering inclusivity and belonging for and with LGBTQ plus youth is important, then we can use responses to sort of open up a bit of a dialogue before I continue.
Great, and I'll monitor those, Maru, and let you know
Okay,
if
great.
you're not able to see those.
Yeah, I can't see anything.
Okay, I will let you know what comes up.
Okay, great.
Somebody
Perfect.
just wrote,
Thank
we
you.
can provide protective factors and acceptance to help support youth mental health.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
we want them to know
and the
wanted and cared for. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
It creates a safe environment for all members of the community rather than just those who fit into society's boxes.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. And that focus on protective factors is especially important because so often we wait to react It's no different with LGBTQ plus youth. I saw it in my work as a school counselor. It was, it was never an issue until it was an issue. And I'm trying to foster those protective factors and be proactive about fostering an environment where all young people can thrive is really important. So first, fostering an inclusive and affirming environment for LGBTQ plus youth is important because it's our obligation professionally and ethically. And all of these organizations that work with young people in one capacity or another, whether it's in a youth serving organization or it's in a school with families, have some sort of statement that outlines and underscores their commitment to LGBTQ plus youth. I live in and work in the state of North Carolina, and North Carolina Cooperative Extension is unwavering in their non-discrimination policy. They call for open access to every North Carolinian seeking to participate in our programs and activities. They say we do not tolerate discrimination, harassment, or retaliation on the basis of a variety of identities, including gender identity and sexual orientation. That commitment extends to serving all youth, including LGBTQ plus young people. This statement was made in 2019 by the president and CEO of the National 4-H Council. So it's important to keep that in mind. And every state, every university, every land-grant institution from which Extension operates has different non-discrimination policies, but they're all clear in stating that discrimination of any kind is not to be tolerated. And 4-H is clear in saying that their role is to serve all young people, and that includes LGBTQ plus young people. So in addition to our professional and ethical obligation as youth serving professionals to serve all young people, it's also important to focus on this issue. That LGBTQ plus youth are vulnerable, especially vulnerable to harassment and to bullying. And there have been numerous studies show that this is true. GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, comes out with a national school climate survey every 2 years. And they found consistently that LGBTQ students are at higher risk for bullying and harassment. And that has implications academically, socially, emotionally. So 65% of LGBTQ students who were surveyed in the latest school climate survey heard homophobic remarks like fag or, and 30% missed at least one day of school in the past month because they felt unsafe or uncomfortable, and 85% were verbally harassed in the past year. We also know that suicide rates are higher, rates for depression, anxiety are higher as well. And so it's, again, important as professionals to address this issue. And also the issue of youth, LGBTQ plus youth homelessness is one that warrants our attention as well, especially during this time of the global pandemic. And so we know that LGBTQ plus youth make up to 40% of the homeless youth population, even though they make up only up to about 7% of the population. And so that's a huge discrepancy. So it's also something that we have to keep in mind. And we also know whenever steps are taken to foster a more inclusive, supportive, affirming climate for LGBTQ plus youth, all youth benefit. And so I'm not sure who knows who this is, but this young man's name is Channing Smith. And the reason I put up his photo is because often, we it gets better, which is to say, situation for LGBTQ plus youth has improved. Certainly it's true on a national scale. If you look at where things are now versus where things were 10, 15 years ago, even 5 years ago, things have vastly improved. But what's made invisible from that narrative is that in pockets of rural America, small town America, more conservative areas of the country, life is still very difficult for LGBTQ plus youth. And so this young person several months ago was closeted, and he was exchanging some messages with another, male chat. And one of his classmates got a hold of those messages and made them public. And within hours, this young person decided to take because the was so deep that he just couldn't imagine being out openly in his community, and he couldn't bear that embarrassment. And this was someone who had shown no signs of suicide before. And so important to tell these stories, because there's a lot, we've made great strides, but there's still a long way to go, especially in certain parts of the country where young people don't have LGBTQ plus resource centers and resources, or a gender and sexuality alliance at their school. And it's also important to focus on this issue because all young people want to feel liked, respected, supported, included, and understood. And all young people deserve to feel liked, respected, supported, included, and understood. Of course, includes LGBTQ youth. And the research is clear. When certain safeguards are in place, namely, this is again from Glissan's research, and it's focused on schools because the vast majority of research on LGBTQ plus youth is within schools. But they found that when supportive school staff, and inclusive and effective school safety policies, there's less harassment, victimization, fewer instances of assault, fewer negative remarks about gender expression, and in turn, that means that these youth are less likely to take sexual risks. They show less signs of depression, anxiety, their self-esteem improves, they feel a greater sense of belonging, etc. And so even though this is focused on schools, we can easily transfer it to any environment and say that, substitute supportive school staff with supportive adults, right? Substitute inclusive curriculum with inclusive programming. Substitute effective school safety policies with just affirming policy large. And this is really, someone mentioned protective factors earlier, but it really is reflective of positive youth development and the 5 C's of positive youth development. We know that young people thrive when, when they're in supportive environments, and when they're surrounded by supportive adults. So now we'll shift it to talking about, some of the about LGBTQ plus youth. And I know, those of you who have been going to other sessions have probably had a lot of, have probably sat through a lot of information around terminology and statistics and things like that. And so I'll make this brief. Of course, if folks have questions, feel free to ask questions, but I was really hoping to sort of move beyond just the knowledge component and get to some more of like the best practices and developing skills and things like that. And so I'm putting this slide up again just to read what the letters LGBTQ plus youth stand for. And again, plus can include, all sexualities, sexual orientations, and fall under the LGBTQ umbrella. So anything from asexual to intersex to pansexual, demisexual, all of those things. And it's important to recognize that language is constantly evolving, and just to be open to that and be flexible to that, and be willing to learn. So transgender, I just wanted to spend a little more time on, because often that's where you see a lot of the misconception. Transgender is often used as an umbrella term, and you can think of transgender as binary and non-binary. So binary, you have folks who identify with gender that's different than one assigned to them at birth. And then non-binary are folks who just don't feel like they don't fit into any one box, like the sort of stereotypical male box or the stereotypical female box. And so there are a lot of different ways to be non-binary, and I've listed a few, but the list is vast. The list is very is very long, and so but that's just something to keep in mind. And this graphic, I think, does a good job of explaining gender. And so you have gender identity, which includes how one identifies in terms of their gender, be that male, female, or another gender. As we discussed previously, non-binary gender. Gender expression is the extent to which one expresses gender in a way that's feminine, masculine, or in a way that's non-binary, or the gender expression. One day, an individual might express their gender in a way that's more feminine or more masculine, and so gender can also be very fluid. And then you have sex assigned at birth, which is what you talk about also with intersex folks being assigned female at birth or male at birth. And then there's intersex, which is when it doesn't just refer to external genitalia, which is what folks often think about when they think about intersex, but it also includes sex chromosomes or internal reproductive organs that aren't that don't fit sort of the standard mold of male or female. And then there's physical and emotional attraction, which is what we talk about when we talk about sexual orientation, who someone's physically, emotionally attracted to. And of course, as I said before, this is different than transgender. Yeah, someone just said in the chat, I noticed it's nice to see a variation of the genderbread person. And I agree. I think the gender unicorn is a great. It's also important to use transgender as an adjective. So using transgender people or a transgender person, and avoiding, the transgenders or transgendered a lot, but it should just be transgender people or a transgender person. And then here are just some, best practices for gender affirming language. So referring to gender non-conforming youth by their chosen name, using pronouns that affirm young people's gender identity, and modeling the use of pronouns. So this helps to normalize, introducing yourself, the pronouns that you use, whether, that's an assumption this or, in your email signature, including your pronouns there. Avoid separating by gender. So if you have an activity, sometimes it can be easy, if you need to separate young people, to say, okay, all, girls over here and all boys over here. Really avoid doing that, because there likely are some young people in that group who may is non-binary. Make sure that paperwork is inclusive of all genders. again, because it's not everybody identifies as male or female or cisgender. And don't make assumptions about a young person's gender and or sexual orientation. And research has shown that people say will often say, oh well, it's not deal with just pronouns. Why are people focusing so much attention on this? Well, it's important, and then research has shown that it's important that when we use a transgender youth's chosen name at work, at school, with friends, or at home, it reduces depression symptoms by 71%, according to this study, reduces thoughts of suicide by 34%, reduces suicide attempts by 65%. And so, if you think about your name and your pronouns, that's really just a core part of your identity. And so so being really intentional, and sometimes it can be difficult, and sometimes you can forget to try as best, and it can make such a huge difference. So now we are going to shift to best practices for supporting LGBTQ plus youth in 4-H. So for most, it's important to assess your biases, stock of your personal biases. We all have biases, and these are often a result of our own socialization. Think back, what are some of the dominant narratives that I've heard about LGBTQ plus people, and how have those narratives impacted the way that I view and LGBTQ plus youth? So that reflection, that willingness to reflect is really important. And then also seeking opportunities for personal and professional development, to be able to expand your knowledge base and to develop skills and dispositions that will help you better support LGBTQ plus youth. And that also includes upholding the ethical standards related to privacy and confidentiality. It's also important to consider intersecting identities. So gender and sexual orientation don't occur in a vacuum, right? None of our identities occur in a vacuum. They're influenced and informed by the mosaic of all of our identities, and young people are no different. And so a gay white male who was raised by two progressive parents who are very accepting of his identity is going to have a very different experience than a Latina lesbian who whose parents don't speak English and are devoutly Catholic. And so being able to keep that in mind and having that perspective is important as well. And then it's important to know your audience. I've worked in doing trainings and working with folks in audiences that were very open to to learning, and then audiences that were resistant and even hostile. And that includes my work in Georgia, 10 plus years ago. Includes working in various parts of Latin America, including Chile and the Dominican Republic, and Bolivia, where there was a lot of resistance. And so knowing your audience is important. And I'll give you one example. This happened actually just a few months ago in Georgia. So a Georgia school district, it was Pickens County, which is a relatively small school district. They, as a result of a court case, had to implement a transgender friendly bathroom policy, and they sort of ruled it out without doing without doing any sort of without explaining or educating folks about why this was important. And so after that that policy was implemented, the community, which fairly conservative community, was outraged, and they were leaning on, you know, all sorts of misconceptions and misinformation that is swirling out there about transgender friendly bathroom policies. They had, you know, they had school board overflowing, and ultimately students and teachers and administrators were getting death threats for having this bathroom policy in place. And they ended up having to just reverse it because people's lives were being threatened. And of course, you know, looking back, I think it's clear that the district could have taken steps to communicate this policy in a way that was more effective, in a way that took into account the audience that they were dealing with. These were folks who, you know, didn't have a lot of information about why this policy was important. And so they were leaning on misinformation, and they were relying on, you know, the scare tactics that heard about. So this is an instance, I think, where it's very clear that, you know, they proper steps to convey that message in an appropriate way. And so what I've learned in talking to people throughout the years, and folks who are initially resistant, is that it's important to find some common ground. And I've always found that there's common ground in essentially saying we both, regardless of where we stand on this issue, you know, be it politically or theologically or whatever, you know, as educators, as youth serving professionals, we all believe that young people should feel included and respected and affirmed and supported. And I have yet one person who disagrees with me on this point. And so if we can come together on that common point, then that can be an point for just as we use scaffolding to teach young people new concepts, I think this idea of scaffolding is also when it comes to creating awareness about LGBTQ and why it's important to be more inclusive, and just take steps, right? And be willing to meet people where they are, because you can't get you know to your goal overnight. Sometimes it just takes a little while to get there. So having that, being willing to sort of scaffold things is important as well. And then also representation is paramount. Whether that's you know, schools, as you saw with the Listen study, that includes, you know, making sure that LGBTQ plus people are represented in the curriculum. So, you know, when you think about how are families represented, what do you have hanging up on the wall of your facility? Are your spaces sending around norms of gender and sexual orientation in families, and what could they say? And representation is really important. It's something that shouldn't be Yeah, it sounds like it's something trivial, you know, if you put a rainbow sticker or something up in your office, but it can make such a difference. And I can give you one example. When I was working in a conservative school district in Georgia over 10 years ago as a school counselor, um, there was quite a bit of resistance and hostility against LGBTQ plus youth, and I had a rainbow sticker in my office. And I can't tell you the number of students who came to my office and confided in me, and told me, that they were gay, or they were questioning their sexual orientation, or they were afraid that they would be going to hell, or they didn't know how they could come out to their parents or their friends or their peers at school. And the reason that they confided in me is because they saw that rainbow sticker, and they knew that I was someone that they could talk to about this. And so it really can make a world of difference for young, especially those who live in communities where there isn't a lot of support. And I really like this this quote by the American poet Adrienne Rich, who said, "When someone, the teacher, describes the world, you are not in it. It creates a moment of psychic disequilibrium. Looked into a mirror and saw nothing." I think that's a very powerful quote. And data is really important. Often you hear people saying, "Oh, not an issue here. We support all youth. Um, anti-LGBTQ bullying isn't an issue. Young people don't get harassed here, or whatever." Or, on the flip side, our staff here, address challenges as is, et cetera, and so forth. But if you have data to suggest, okay, maybe the school climate isn't so welcoming, or you have data to suggest that that your staff don't have the skills necessary, the knowledge necessary to be able to adequately and appropriately handle instances of anti-LGBTQ plus bullying, or wouldn't know how to address, wouldn't know how to properly welcome a transgender young person into their program. If you have that data, then you can take it back, to the appropriate places and say, "Hey, this actually is an issue," or "Our staff is asking for this," or our climate isn't as safe and supportive and as welcoming as it could be. Then then it's a lot more difficult to ignore. And so having that data is really important, and using data and conducting assessments will help you further this along. And then, of course, valuing and including youth voices, and I don't have to explain why this is important. 4-H is really big on valuing and including and amplifying young people's voices, and we that the tremendous benefit that has on young people when they feel that their voices are valued and included. And this is a graphic that I like to use. It's Hart's ladder of youth participation. And these are every rung on the ladder, every rung further up is how, shows how young can meaningfully participate. So the further up they are on the ladder, the more active a role they're taking in participating. Whether that's helping to plan an event, or helping to conduct a climate survey, or whatever sorts of ways that young people can be involved on this front. And this is it's a short clip. It's of a Gender and Sexuality Alliance in North Carolina, in Durham. And they're talking about both their involvement as young people, but also they're talking about what it is that they need adults to know. And so hopefully I can play this. It'll play.
Being out as LGBTQ at Hillside High isn't always. The teachers and administrators have the power to make us feel welcome and safe here. Bullying is happening to LGBTQ. Sometimes LGBTQ allies get bullied too. Silence when you see students being bullied, support for bullying, and just telling students to be quiet is the same thing as addressing bullying. My sexual orientation and gender identity is not just a phase. Being LGBTQ is not a choice, it's biological. LGBTQ youth are 6 times more likely to suffer from depression, 4 times more likely to commit suicide, and twice as likely to abuse alcohol or drugs than our peers. Plus, 25 to 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ. It's not because there is something wrong with us, it's because there aren't enough people in our lives taking us along. You can help me feel safe and welcome in school no matter what your personal views are. I'm proud of who I am, and you should be proud of me too. You can support me by learning about terms, pronouns, identities, gender identity, gender presentation, and sexual orientation. The internet has all the answers. You can support me by sending a fresh right away with students. You can support me by stopping students from saying the F word or that's so gay in class and have a conversation about why that's wrong to say. You can support me by asking me and all students what names and pronouns. You can support me by not assuming you know everyone's sexual orientation or gender identity. You can support me by being open-minded and asking respectful questions. You can support me by allowing me the freedom to express myself without backlash. You can support me by not outing me to students or any of their adults. Just because I told you I'm LGBTQ doesn't mean I'm ready for it. You can support me by treating us with the same respect that you give everyone else. You can support me by just listening to me. This is what it's like to be lesbian and gay, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, transgender, gender non-conforming, queer, questioning at Hillside. This is what to be us.
All right, so hopefully everybody could see that. I wasn't sure while it was, but hopefully everybody could see that. All right.
And Maru, I'll paste the link into the chat box so everybody can access it. I think it might have been a little bit choppy, but we'll make sure everybody has the
Okay.
link.
All right, great. And I also just wanted to bring up this organization, which I'm part of at North Carolina State Extension. It's called #PassTheMicYouth, and it's a youth-led, youth-centered podcast and blog that's focused on amplifying youth voices, shining a spotlight on youth activism, and also giving youth-serving professionals resources to cultivate critical consciousness. And we have resources that are specific to working with LGBTQ plus youth, along with other resources too. So if you want to check that out, not only as a way to help, foster and amplify youth voice, but also as a way to get access to LGBT resources, you can go to the website, which is just passthemicyouth.com. And so, let's see. All right, we have about 14 left, and I guess we can a chat feature for this. What steps can you take to make your programs more LGBTQ plus and affirming.
Great.
Based on the information that was presented, and just, you know, based on your own self-reflection, or based on the work that you've done so far and effective for you.
Great. And Maru, I'll just remind our attendees that they can, if they post to all participants, then everyone can read the comment. If they post to all attendees, then just the attendees will read that. So the participants include the presenter and the host. And then there's different options. You can post to just the presenter or just the host. So just wanted to make that clear
Okay,
to everyone.
I think that there might be a lot of other Zoom folks in the presentation. I'm not accustomed to WebEx. I use Zoom, and so this is a learning curve for me as well.
And I'll monitor those while our
Great.
attendees are typing. Somebody just posted, would you be able to paste the link for this website as well? So is that
Yes.
the Out at Hillside website, or for the podcast website? And we'll get some more comment, some more detail there.
So for the podcast and blog website, it's just passthemicyouth.com, and then that redirects you to the that site. It's easier to remember passthemicyouth.com than passthemicyouth.ncsu.edu, which you could also use to get there, but passthemicyouth.com is
Great. I'll get that URL, that website, and I'll post that for everybody.
great.
And I can read some of the comments here. We have one comment. I can read the comments here. We have one comment.
Yeah.
I have rainbow magnets on my door in my office. I have a fair collection of rainbow clothing as well, I hope. Sends an open and affirming message to those I work with, especially you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually, I wrote my dissertation on school counselors' experiences as advocates for and with LGBTQ plus youth. And one of the counselors that I spoke to was working in a rural community, and she said, "I don't feel safe putting a sticker on my, I have one on my filing cabinet, so that you know, folks usually don't notice that, but the people, the young people, the students who need to see that will see that. So whatever you can do is really appreciated and will be noticed by the people who need to see it."
Wonderful. And another comment that was just posted, we have 4-H pride shirts and buttons.
Yeah, I'm actually wearing a 4-H pride shirt right now. I don't know if I actually purchased it from Washington State University, I think. I don't know if that's the same group of young people who were selling the shirts as fundraisers, but
And that person just posted, yes, that's us.
oh, that's awesome. Cool.
And
Oh
someone
yeah,
else
Allison. Hey, yeah, yeah.
another comment here. I have a rainbow flag tucked behind my nameplate beside my door at the office. My messenger bag has a collection of rainbow and affirming buttons on it, and I set it in a visible place on the front table during programming so my kids see it as they come in each week. It opens the door to knowing it is a safe space and I'm going to be a safe person to talk to.
That's great. So lots of steps to, in terms of like dispositions, I think you all really are doing a great job with that. Just having a of being welcoming and inclusive and affirming, and that is really important for LGBTQ plus youth.
Maru,
Yes.
um, a, something came in the Q&A box. I share my pronouns in my email signature after my name in virtual meetings and model pronoun sharing in meetings.
Great. That's important as well.
Another,
Has anyone done anything? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say a few more comments have come in. Can you send a link to where to get the 4-H Pride shirts and buttons?
So maybe Allison can share that. Allison White, 'cause, I know she was the one I bought the shirt from her. So
Great. And another few comments. Is there a link to the shirts? Another one. And I share my pronouns in my email signature. Oh, it's the same. I think it's the same comment that went in the Q&A. So go ahead.
perfect.
To you, Maru.
Cool. And I was just gonna throw it back at folks and ask if anyone, because it sounds like people have done a lot in terms of the representation piece and the visibility piece. Has anyone done anything else aside from that to make their programs more LGBTQ plus inclusive and affirming? And not necessarily just their programs, but maybe just space that they work in, or anything in terms of like professional development for the other staff members, or having conversations, or anything aside from visibility and representation, or any steps that they can take or they're thinking about taking.
Maru, another comment's come in. I work to be careful with my language. I no longer use, quote, you guys while
Right.
talking to a group. I still, with folks, kids, participants, etc., I still catch myself using gendered language and work to change it when I hear it or someone else reminds me.
Yeah. And language is also something that's incredibly important. But you're right; those habits are sometimes difficult to break. I grew up saying "you guys" as well, and so I often catch myself still saying it. Let's see. We had. Okay, great. Another comment.
The shirt fundraising is on hold, but if you email, the address is there. We can help share t-shirt templates and ideas. Another comment, making sure to ask the participants to how they would like me to address them. I'm still a high school student. Another comment, I'm still a high school student, but I wrote and received a $1,000 grant for the school to buy LGBTQ books for K through 12 students and have training speakers for the teachers. So great.
Oh, that's amazing. That's awesome. Yeah, anything you can do in schools to make your libraries, to encourage your librarians to include LGBTQ plus affirming books in the library is huge, as is the professional development for faculty.
And another comment, I think it's important to have LGBTQ information and history in the school curriculum. So advocating for that means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the research supports that as well, that the importance of having an LGBTQ plus inclusive curriculum.
And another comment, at an organizational conference a few years ago for youth development professionals, we had a wonderful presentation around gender identity and representations and sexual orientation. It was received well by most staff, mocked by others. The staff who need the training, in my opinion, are the ones least likely to attend unless it's mandatory.
Right. Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing, that often with professional development related to LGBTQ plus youth, it is the folks who are already committed are the ones who are attending, not the ones who need it. Sometimes, some ways to go around that I found in the past is to have a sort of professional development that's based on diversity, equity, and inclusion writ large, and include within that ways to support LGBTQ plus youth. Once they're already there, you work up to that. And so, sometimes you have to get creative, but you're right. That's definitely the reality in a lot of cases.
Maru, I'd just like to remind us we're just a few minutes before the top of the hour, so maybe if anyone has any closing comments or questions, or if you have any closing comments you'd like to leave us with.
Well, what I can do is I can just quickly go through the other two slides just so that folks can leave with something to think about. And then I can, if you want to just provide my email address, and if folks have any, if we don't have time to get to questions, then, folks can email me directly, and I'm happy to share resources or answer questions that way as well. But so I was going to do a case scenario activity, which I know is difficult to do virtually. But I was just sort of going to pose these scenarios as a large group and then use the chat box. So the first is you work in a conservative rural community and the climate is somewhat hostile toward LGBTQ plus youth. While you want to foster a more affirming environment, you're not sure how. Your county director is supportive yet resistant to change for fear of backlash. What do you do? With whom do you collaborate? And so that's something that that hopefully you can think about after this. And then the second is after a summer camp activity, you notice that I can't read it all because it's blocked. But anyways, a young person, you overhear a young person complain, "That's so gay." I know that's not a refrain that's commonly used. That was more 10 years ago. But just to start thinking of, okay, how might you respond if you hear either a young person making an anti-LGBTQ plus epithet or one of your colleagues? That's important to think about, right? Because one of the things that I've noticed is when I do any sort of professional development is that people will say, I have the terminology down, I feel like I'm knowledgeable, but it's about how do I apply those skills in real life. And so hopefully you've gotten some sense of how to do that throughout the course of this summit. But again, if you need resources or if you have questions, please feel free to email me. And Paul, if you want to go ahead and put my email address in the chat box, it's mgonza22@ncsu.edu.
I just did that, so
Perfect. Great. And we have I don't think, maybe 30 seconds. I don't know.
sure,
Or are we
it.
done?
Yep. No,
Yeah.
go for it.
Oh, if anybody has any last minute questions.
Sure. Any brief questions, and I'll monitor. Somebody just posted. It is definitely still used by young people, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I don't see any coming up.
All right. Well, if you have any questions, please shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions or share resources with you, but it's really been a pleasure. I have to say, in the spirit of transparency, my broadband internet connection went out yesterday afternoon. So I thought I was going to have to drive to a library, park in the parking lot, and try to get their Wi-Fi connection. But my colleague graciously said, you can come to my porch and do it from there. So I'm on my colleague's porch doing this because I have no internet at home. So I'm glad this was able to work out. And I really, I'm just so thrilled that you all put this together and that people came, like I said, especially on a Saturday. I couldn't be more excited. So thank you again.
Maru, thank you. We're so fortunate to have you, your time today and expertise for sharing that. With that, I'm going to say thank you again to Maru for joining us. We're going to take just a brief break. Please stay logged on. No need to log off and log back on. We're just taking a short break while we transition to our next set of presenters. So stay tuned. Thanks again, and we'll be right back with you.
Thank you.